Hi guys, this is Allison from Alley Creations. How are you? Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you have yet to do so. And if you get anything from my work, connect the dot, an epiphany, a mind explosion, a new book to read, a new author to explore, artwork to create. Please consider supporting my work. All the links are at the bottom of the description. Allylatcreations211.com is where you can find patriotic cards. Pyramids, all of those beautiful pyramids behind me are up for grabs. Artwork, commission paintings, I do commission drawings. I also make candles. I do a lot of things. I make gem crystal holders. And I need 308 shells to make some bullet business card holders. So please check out my website. If you're interested in any of that stuff, please email me. That's the best way to do some exchange of energy. 3D memberships is another great way to support my work. You guys, as a channel member, get free entries into my monthly raffles. So you never know you're going to win. And all 3 channel members last raffle won. And really, really excited. And those raffles are going to go out on Monday. So consider that. And I also put channel member only content out. And today I just uploaded an oracle reading for the small collective of members. Unfortunately, Zoom today crashed on me twice, so I hope it doesn't crash anymore. It took forever to get the reading done, and then having to go in and edit it and combine it. Yes, crazy. So hopefully that doesn't happen. Today we're going to do the Secret Doctrine by Blavatsky. This is stanza 11. In the middle portion of it, it's a long, once again, these stanzas are really long. I'm going to probably have to cut it at some point. Be mindful. This is picking up where we left off on the last video. If we regard the second portion of the third race as the first representatives of the really human race with solid bones, then Haeckel's surmise that the evolution of the primitive man took place in either southern Asia or Lemuria, Africa. Whether Eastern or Western being out of question is correct enough, if not entirely so. To be accurate, however, in the same way that the evolution of the first race from the bodies of the Pitars took place on 7 distinctly separated regions of then only Earth at the Arctic Pole, so did the ultimate transformation of the third occur. It began in those northern regions, which have just been described a few pages back as including the Bering Straits, in what there then was a dry land in Central Asia. Then the climate was semi-tropical, even in the Arctic regions, and most adapted to the primitive wants of nascent physical man. That region, however, has been more than once frigid and tropical in turn since the appearance of man. The commentary tells us that the third race was only about the middle point of its development when, quote, the axle of the wheel tilted, the sun and moon shone no longer over the heads of that portion of the sweat-born. People knew snow, ice, and frost, and men, plants, and animals were dwarfed in their growth. Those that did not perish remained as half-grown babes in size and intellect. This was the third pralaya of the races, which means again that our globe is subject to 7 periodical entire changes which go pari passu with the races. For the Secret Doctrine teaches that during this round there must be 7 terrestrial pralayas, 3, occasioned by the change in the inclination of the Earth's axis. It is a law which acts at its appointed time and not at a blindly, as science may think, but in distinct accordance and harmony with karmic law. In occultism, this inexorable law is referred to as the Great Adjuster. Science confesses its ignorance of the cause producing climate vicissitudes and such changes in the axial direction, which are always followed by the vicissitudes, nor does it seem so sure of the axial changes. I got Freya hair on me. And being unable to account for them, it is prepared rather to deny the axial phenomena altogether than admit the intelligent karmic hand and law, which alone could reasonably explain such sudden changes and their results. It has tried to account for them by various more or less fantastic speculations, one of which would be the sudden and imaginary collision of our Earth with a comet as the cause of all the geological revolutions. But we prefer holding to our esoteric explanation, since Volhat is as good as any comet, having, in addition, universal intelligence to guide him. Thus, since that long V name I can never pronounce, Manu's humanity appeared on this earth, there have already been 4 such axial disturbances. When the old continents, save the first one, were sucked in by the ocean, other lands appeared and huge mountain chains arose where there had been none before. The face of the globe was completely changed each time. The survival of the fittest nations and races were secured through timely help, and the unfit ones, the failures, were disposed of by being swept off the earth. Such sorting and shifting does not happen between sunset and sunrise, as one may think, but requires several thousands of years before the new house is set in order. The subraces are subject to the same cleansing process as also the side branchlets, the family races. Let one well acquainted with astronomy and mathematics throw a retrospective glance into the twilight and shadows of the past. Let him observe, take notes of what he knows of the history of peoples and nations, and collate their respective rise and falls with what is known of astronomical cycles, especially with the sidereal year, equal to 25,868 of our solar years. If the observer is gifted with the faintest intuition, then will he find how the weal and woe of nations is intimately connected with the beginning and close of the sidereal cycle. True, the non-occultist has the disadvantage that he has no such far distant times to rely upon. He knows nothing through each science of what took place nearly 10,000 years ago. Yet he may find consolation in the knowledge, or, if he so prefers, speculation on the fate of every one of the modern nations he knows of about 16,000 years hence. Our meaning is very clear. Every sidereal year, the tropics recede from the pole 4 degrees, and each revolution from the quintoctal point as the equator rounds through the zodiacal constellations. Now, as every astronomer knows, at present the tropic only 23 degrees and a fraction less than half a degree from the equator. Hence, it has still 2 degrees to run before the end of the sidereal year, which gives humanity in general, our civilized races in particular, a reprieve of about 16,000 years. After the great flood of the third race, the Lemurians then decreased considerably in stature, and the duration of their lives was diminished. Having fallen down in godliness, they mixed with animal races and intermarried among giants and pygmies, the dwarf races of the poles. Many acquired divine, more unlawful knowledge and followed willingly the left path. Thus were the Atlanteans approaching destruction in their turn. How many geological periods it took to accomplish this fourth destruction? Who could tell? But we are told that they, the Atlanteans, built great images, 9, I don't know if that's vatis or yatis, high, 27 feet, the size of their bodies. Lunar fires had destroyed the land of their fathers, the Lemurians. Water threatened the fourth race. It is well worth noticing that most of the gigantic statues discovered on Easter Island, a portion of an undeniably submerged continent, as also those found on the outskirts of the Gobi, a region which had been submerged for untold ages, are all between 20 and 30 feet high. The statues found by Cook on Easter Island measured almost all 27 feet in height and 8 feet across the shoulders. See Stone's Witnesses to Giants at the end of this stanza. The writer is well aware that the modern archaeologists had decided now that these statues are not very old, as declared by one of the high officials of the British Museum, where some of them now are. But this is one of those arbitrary decisions of modern science which does not carry much weight. We are told that it is after the destruction of Lemuria by subterranean fires, the men went on steadily decreasing in stature in process already commenced after their physical fall. And that finally, some millions of years after, they reached between 6 and 7 feet and are now dwindling down as older Asiatic races to nearer 5 than 6 feet. As Pickering shows, there is in the Malay race, a subrace of the fourth root race, a singular diversity of stature. The members of the Polynesian family, the Tahitians, Samoans, Tonga Islanders, are of a high stature than the rest of mankind, but the Indian tribes and the inhabitants of the Indo-Chinese countries are decidedly below the general average. This is easily explained. The Polynesians belong to a very earliest of their surviving subraces, and the others to the very last in transitory stock. As the Tasmanians are now completely extinct and the Australians rapidly dying out, so will the other old races soon follow. But we're not seeing that. Now, how could those records have been preserved? We may be asked. Even the knowledge of the zodiac is denied to the Hindus by our kind and learned Orientalists who conclude that Aryan Hindus knew nothing of it. Before the Greeks brought it into the country, this uncalled for slander was so sufficiently refuted by Bailey, and what is more, by the clear evidence of facts, as not to need very much additional refutation. While the Egyptians had on their zodiacs irrefutable proofs of records, having embraced more than 3.5 sidereal years, or about 87,000 years, the Hindu calculations cover nearly 33 such years, or 850,000 years. The Egyptian priests assured Herodotus that the pole of the earth and the pole of the ecliptic had formerly coincided. But, as remarked by the author of the Sphinxad, these poor benighted Hindus have registered a knowledge of astronomy for 10 times 25,000 years since the last local flood in Asia, or Age of Horror, in the latitude of India. And they possess recorded observations from the date of the first great flood within the Aryan historical memory that would submerge the last portions of Atlantis 850,000 years ago. The floods which proceed are, of course, more traditional than historical. The sinking and transformation of Lemuria beginning nearly at the Arctic Circle, Norway. The third race ended its career in Lanka, or rather on that which became Lanka with the Atlanteans. The small remnant now known as Ceylon is the northern highland of ancient Lanka, which the enormous island of that name was in the Lemurian period, the gigantic continent described a few pages back. As a master would say, why should not your geologists bear in mind that under the continents explored and fathomed by them, there may be hidden deep in the fathomless, or rather unfathomed, ocean beds, other and far older continents whose strata have never been geologically explored, and that they may someday upset entirely their present theories. Why not admit that our present continents have, like Lemuria and Atlantis, been several times already submerged, and had the time to reappear again and bear their new groups of mankind and civilizations, and that at the first great geological upheaval, at the next cataclysm, is a series of periodical cataclysms that occur from the beginning to the end of every round. Our already auto-sized continents will go down and Lemuria's and Atlantis's come up again? Not the same identical continents, of course, but here an explanation is needed. No confusion need arise as regards the postulation of a northern Lemuria. The promulgation of the great continent into the North Atlantic Ocean is in no way submersive of the opinions so widely held as to the site of the lost Atlantis, and one corroborates the other. It must be noted that Lemuria, which served as the cradle of the third root race, not only embraced a vast area in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, but extended in the shape of a horseshoe past Madagascar, round South Africa, then a mere fragment in process of formation through the Atlantic up to Norway. The great English freshwater deposit called the Weldon, which every geologist regards as the mouth of a former great river, is the bed of the main stream which drained northern Lemuria into the secondary age. The former reality of this river is a fact of science. Will its votaries, I don't know how to say that word, acknowledge the necessary and or accepting the secondary age northern Lemuria, which their data demand? Professor Berthold Seaman not only accepted the reality of such a mighty continent, but regarded Australia and Europe as formerly portions of the one continent, thus corroborating the whole horseshoe doctrine already enunciated. No more striking confirmation of our position could be given than the fact that the elevated ridge in the Atlantic Basin, 9,000 feet in height, which runs for some 2,000 or 3,000 miles southwards from a point near the British Islands, first slopes towards South America, then shifts almost at right angles to proceed in a southeasterly line toward the African coast, whence it runs on southward to Tristan da Cunha. This ridge is a remnant of the Atlantic continent, and could it be traced further, would establish the reality of a submarine horseshoe junction with a former continent in the Indian Ocean. The Atlantic portion of Lemuria was the geological basis of what is generally known as Atlantis. The latter, indeed, must be regarded rather as a development of the Atlantean promulgation of Lemuria than as entirely new mass of land upheaval to meet the special requirements of the fourth root race. Just as in the case of race evolution, so in that of the shifting and reshifting of continental masses, no hard and fast line can be drawn where new order ends and another begins. Continually, in natural processes, it is never broken. Thus, the fourth race Atlanteans were developed from a nucleus of northern Lemurian third race men, centered, roughly speaking, toward a point of land in what is now the mid-Atlantic Ocean. Their continent was formed by the coalescence of many islands and peninsulas, which were upheaved in the ordinary course of time and became ultimately the true home of the great race known as Atlanteans. After this consummation was once obtained, it follows as stated on the highest occult authority that Lemuria should no more be confounded with the Atlantis continent than Europe with America. The above, coming from quarters too discredited by orthodox science, will of course be regarded by it as a more or less happy fiction. Even the clear work of Donnelly, already mentioned, is put aside, notwithstanding that its statements are all confound within a frame of distinctly scientific proofs. But we write for the future. Discoveries in the direction will vindicate the claims of the Asiatic philosophers who maintain that science, geology, ethnology, and history included were pursued by the antediluvian nations who lived an untold number of ages ago. Future finds will justify the correctness of the present observations of such acute minds as H.A. Taine and Renan. The former shows that the civilizations of such archaic nations as the Egyptians, Aryans of India, Chaldeans, Chinese, and Assyrians are the result of preceding civilizations during myriads of centuries. And the latter points to the fact that Egypt at the beginning appears mature, old, and entirely without mythical and heroic ages, as if the country had never known youth. Its civilization has no infancy, and its art no archaic period. The civilization of the old monarchy did not begin with infancy. It was already mature. To this, Professor R. Owen adds that Egypt is recorded to have been a civilized and governed community before the time of Menes. In Winchell, that in epoch of Menes, the Egyptians were already civilized and numerous people. Matthew tells us that Atheus, the son of the first king Menes, built the palace of Memphis, that he was a physician and left anatomical books. This is quite natural if we had to believe the statements of Herodotus, who recorded in, I don't know how to say that name, whatever, that the written history of the Egyptian priests dated from about 12,000 years before his time, but that are 12,000 or even 120,000 years compared with the millions of years elapsed since the Lemurian period. The latter, however, was not been left without witness, its tremendous antiquity notwithstanding. The complete records of growth and development, social and even political life of the Lemurians have been preserved in secret annals. Unfortunately, few of those who can read them, and those who could would still be unable to understand the language unless acquainted with all the 7 keys of its symbolism. For the comprehension of the occult doctrines is based on that of the 7 sciences, which sciences find their expression in the 7 different applications of the secret records to the exoteric texts. Thus, we have to deal with the modes of thought on 7 entirely different planes of ideality. Every text relates to and has been rendered from one of the following standpoints: the realistic plane of thought, the idealistic, the purely divine or spiritual. The other planes too far transcend the average consciousness, especially of the materialistic mind, to admit of their being even symbolized in terms of ordinary phraseology. There is no pure mythical element in any of the ancient religious texts, but the mode of thought in which they were originally written has to be found out and closely adhered to during the process of interpretation. For it is either symbolical, archaic mode of thought, emblematical, a later thought, very ancient mode of thought, parabolical, allegory, hieroglyphical, or again, logogrammatical. The most difficult method of all, as every letter, as in the Chinese language, represents a whole word. Thus, almost every proper name, whether it in the Vedas, the Book of the Dead, or the Bible to a degree, is composed of such logograms. No one who is not initiated into the mystery of the occult religious logography can presume to know what a name in any ancient fragment means, before he has mastered the meaning of every letter that composes it. How is it to be expected that merely profane thinker, however great his erudication in orthodox symbolism, so to say, in that symbolism which can never get out of the old grooves of solar myth and sexual worship, shall penetrate into the arcana behind the veil? No one who deals with the husk or shell of the dead letter and devotes himself to the kaleidoscopic transformation of barren word symbols can never expect to get beyond the vagaries of modern mythologies. Thus, Vahi Vaz Vu Tu, that I think is that long V name, Zitharus, Declulion, Noah, and all the head figures of the world deluges, universal and partial, astronomical or geological, all furnish in their very names the records of the causes and effects which lead to the event if one can but read them fully. All such deluges are based on events that took place in nature and stand as historic records. Therefore, whether they are sidereal, geological, or even simply allegorical, of a moral event or other of higher planes of being. This, we believe, has now been sufficiently demonstrated during the long expanded explanation necessitated by the allegorical stanzas. To speak of a race 9 yetis, or 27 feet high, in a work claiming a more scientific character than Jack the Giant Killer is a somewhat unusual proceeding. Where are your proofs? The writer will be asked. In history and tradition is the answer. Traditions about a race of giants in the days of old are universal. They exist in oral and written lore. India had her Danavas and Datas. Ceylon had her Rakshasas, Greece her Titans, Egypt her colossal heroes, Chaldea her Nimrod, and the Jews their enemy, the land of Moab, with famous giants Anakim. Moses speaks of Og, a king who was 9 cubits high, 15 feet, 4 inches, and 4 wide, and Goliath was 6 cubits, a span in height, or 10 feet, 7 inches. The only difference found between the revealed scripture and the evidence furnished to us here, Herodotus, Diodorus, Silicles, Homer, Pliny, Plutarch, and Philostratus, is that while the pagans mention only the skeletons of giants dead untold ages before, relics that some of them had personally seen, the Bible interpreters unblushingly demand that geology and archaeology should believe that several countries were inhabited by such giants in the days of Moses, giants before whom the Jews were as grasshoppers and who still existed in the days of Hosea and David, or Joshua and David. Unfortunately, their own chronology is in the way. Either the latter or the giants had to be given up. Of still standing witness to the submerged continents and the colossal men that inhabited them, there are still a few archaeology claims, several such on this globe, though beyond wondering what these may be. It never made any serious attempt to solve the mystery. Besides the Easter Island statues mentioned already, to what epoch do the colossal statues still erect and intact near Bayman belong? Archaeology assigns them to the first centuries of Christianity, as usual, and errs in this as it does in many other speculations. A few words of description will show the readers what are the statues of both Easter Island and Bayman. We will first examine what is known of them in the Orthodox Science in the Countries of the World by Robert Brown in Volume 4, page 43. It's stated that, quote, Tiepi, Rupa Nui, or Easter Island, is an isolated spot almost 2,000 miles from the southern miles from the South American coast. In length, it is about 12 miles in breadth 4, and there is an extant crater 1,050 feet high in its center. The island abounds in craters, which have been extinct for so long that no tradition of their activity remains. But who made the great stone images, which are now the chief attraction of the island to visitors? No one knows, says the reviewer. It is more than likely that they were here when the present inhabitants, a handful of Polynesian savages, arrived. Their workmanship is of a high order. And it's still believed that the race who formed them were the frequenters of natives of Peru and other portions of South America. Even at the date of Cook's visit, some of the statues measuring 27 feet in height and 8 across, the shoulders were lying overthrown, while others still standing appeared much larger. One of the latter was so lofty that the shade was sufficient to shelter a party of 30 persons from the heat of the sun. The platforms on which these colossal images stood averaged from 30 to 40 feet in length, 12 to 16 broad, all built of hewn stone in the Cyclopean style, very much like the walls of the temple of Pachamac, however you say that, or the ruins of Teotihuacan in Peru. There is no reason to believe that any of the statues have been built up, bit by scaffolding erected around them, as the journal very suggestively, without explaining how they could be built otherwise unless made by giants of the same size as the statues themselves. One of the best of these colossal images is now in the British Museum. The images of However, we know me and names do not get along. The only one now find erect are 4 in number, 3 deeply sunk in the soil and 1 resting on the back of its head, like the head of a man asleep. Their types, though, are all long-headed, are different. They are evidently meant for portraits, as the noses, the mouths, and chins differ greatly in form. Their headdress, moreover, a kind of flat cap with a black piece attached to its cover, the back portion of the head showing that the originals were no savages of the stone period. Verily, the question may be asked, who made them? But it is not archaeology nor yet geology that is likely to answer, though the latter recognizes the island a portion of a submerged continent. But who cut the Bayman still more colossal statues, the tallest and the most gigantic in the world? For Barthold's Statue of Liberty, now at New York, is a dwarf when compared with the largest of the 5 images. Burns and several learned Jesuits who have visited the place speaks of mountain, all honeycombed with gigantic cells, with 2 immense giants cut in the same rock. They are referred to as a modern Myotes, the last surviving witness of the Myotes who had troubled the earth. The Jesuits are right, and the archaeologist who sees Buddha in the largest of these statues are mistaken, for all those numberless gigantic ruins discovered one after the other in our day, all those immense avenues of colossal ruins that cross North America along and beyond the Rocky Mountains are the work of cyclopses, the true and actual giants of old. Masses of enormous human bones were found in America near Misort. A celebrated modern traveler tells us precisely on the spot which local tradition points out as the landing spot of those giants who overran America when it had hardly arisen from the waters. Central Asian traditions say the same of the Bayman statues. What are they, and what is the place where they have stood for countless ages, defying the cataclysms around them, and even the hand of man, as in the instance of the hordes of Timur and the Vandal warriors of Nadir Shah? Bayman is a small, miserable, half-ruined town in Central Asia, halfway between Kabul and Kalkuk, at the foot of some K long word, a huge mountain of the Peloponnesian or Hindu Kush chain, some 8,500 feet above sea level. In days of old, Bayman was a portion of the ancient city of Djulul, something like that, ruined and destroyed to the last stone by Genghis Khan in the 13th century. The whole valley is hemmed in by colossal rocks, which are full of partially natural and partially artificial caves and grottos, once the dwelling of Buddhist monks who had established in them their varahas. Such vihars, however you say that, are to be met with in profusion. To this day, in the rock-cut temples of India and the valleys of Jalalabad, it is at the entrance of some of these that 5 enormous statues of what is regarded as Buddha have been discovered, or rather rediscovered in our century, as the famous Chinese traveler Thang speaks of and saw them when he visited Bayman in the 7th century. When it is maintained that no longer statues exist on the whole globe, the fact is easily proven on the evidence of all the travelers who have examined them and taken their measurements. Thus, the largest is 173 feet high, or 70 feet higher than the Statue of Liberty now at New York, as the latter is only 105 feet, or 34 meters high. The famous Colossus of Rhodes itself, between whose limbs pass easily the largest vessel of those days, measured only 120 to 130 feet in height. The second statue, cut out in rock like the first one, is only 120 feet, 15 feet taller than the said Liberty. The third statue is only 60 feet high, the two other still smaller, the last one being only a little larger than the average tall man of our present race. The first and largest of the colossi represents a man draped in a kind of toga. That generally appearance of the figure, the lines of the head, drapery, and especially the large hanging ears, point out undeniably that Buddha was meant to be represented, but the above proves nothing, notwithstanding the fact that most of the now existing figures of Buddha represented in the posture of samadhi have large drooping ears. This is a latter intervention and afterthought. The primitive idea was due to esoteric allegory. The unnaturally large ears symbolize the omniscience of wisdom and were meant as a reminder of the power of him who knows and hears all, and whose benevolent love and attention for all creatures nothing can escape. The merciful Lord, our Master, hears the cry of agony of the smallest of the small, beyond vale and mountain, and hastens to its deliverance, says a stanza. Gautama Buddha was an Aryan Hindu, and an approach to such ears is found only among the Mongolian Burmese and Siamese, who, as in Cochin, distort their artificially. The Buddhist monks who turned the grottos of the Mayotes into viharas and cells came into Central Asia about or in the 1st century of the Christian era. Therefore, Thang, I don't know how to say his last name, speaking of the colossal statue, says that the shining of the gold ornamentation that overlaid the statue in his day dazzled one's eyes, but of such gliding there remains not a vestige in modern times. The very drapery, in contrast to the figure itself cut out in the standing rock, is made of plaster and modeled over the stone image. Talbot, who has made the most careful examination, found that this drapery belonged to a far later epoch. The statue itself has therefore been assigned to an earlier period than Buddhism. Who does it represent in such case? It may be asked. Sure. Once more, tradition corroborated by written records, my brain, answers the query and explains the mystery. The Buddhist arhats and ascetics found the 5 statues and many more, now crumbled down to dust, and as the 3 were found by them in colossal niches at the entrance of their future abode, they covered the figures with plaster and over the old modeled new statues made to represent Lord Thigata. The interior walls of the niches are covered to this day with bright paintings of human figures, and the sacred image of Buddha is repeated in every group. These frescoes and ornaments, which remind one of the Byzantine style of painting, are all due to the piety of the monk ascetics, like some other minor figures and rock-cut ornamentations. But the 5 statues belong to the handiwork of the initiates of the 4th race, who sought refuge after the submersion of their continent in the fastness on the summits of the Central Asian mountain chains. Moreover, the 5 statues are an imperishable record of the esoteric teaching about the gradual evolution of the races. The largest is made to represent the first race of mankind, its ethereal body being commemorated in hard everlasting stone for the instruction of future generations, as its remembrance would otherwise never have survived the Atlantean deluge. The second, 120 feet high, represents the sweat-born, and the third, measuring 60 feet, immortalizes the race that fell and thereby inaugurated the first physical race, born of father and mother, the last descendants of which are represented in the statues found on Easter Island, but they were only from 20 to 25 feet in stature at the epoch when Lemuria was submerged, after it had been nearly destroyed by volcanic fires. The 4th race was still smaller, though gigantic in comparison with our present 5th race, and the series culminated finally in the latter. These are then the giants of antiquity, the ante- and post-Diluvian Geborim of the Bible. They live and flourish 1 million rather than between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. The Anakim of Joshua, whose hosts were as grasshoppers in comparison with them, are thus a piece of Israelite fancy, unless indeed the people of Israel claim for Joshua as an antiquity and origin in Eocene, or any rate in the Miocene age, and change the millenniums of their chronology into millions of years. In everything that pertains to prehistoric times, the reader ought to bear the wise words of Montaigne in his mind, saith the great French philosopher. It is a sottish presumption to disdain and condemn that for false, which unto us seemeth to bear no show of likelihood or truth, which is an ordained fault, and those who persuade themselves to be more sufficiency than the vulgar sort. But reason hath taught me that so resolutely to condemn a thing for false and impossible is to assume unto himself the advantage to have the bounds and limits of God's will and the power of our common mother nature tied to his sleeve, and that there is no greater folly in the world than to reduce them to the measure of our capacity and bounds of our sufficiency. If we term those things monsters or miracles to which our reason cannot obtain, how many do such daily present themselves onto our sight? Let us consider through what clouds and what blindfold we are led to the knowledge of most things that pass our hands. Verily, we shall find it is rather custom than science that receiveth the strangeness of them from us, and that those things were they newly presented unto us, we should doubtless deem them as much as more unlikely and incredible than any other. A fair-minded scholar should, before denying the possibility of our history and records, search modern history as well as the universal traditions scattered throughout ancient and modern literature for traces left by these marvelous early races. Few among them the believers suspect the wealth and collaborative evidence, which is found scattered about and buried even in the British Museum alone. The reader is asked to throw one more glance at the subject matter treated of the chapter which follows. And I'm going to leave it here because the next one is Cyclopean Ruins and Colossal Stones of Witness to Giants. Really interesting there. Not much I could say because as studying art history and architecture and all that fun stuff, there's a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of speculation as to who, what, where, when, and why. So I hope you guys enjoyed this read. Sorry for the mispronunciations or not getting words out properly. We all know my issue by now. And if you don't, I have challenges. How's that? Sending each and every one of you love, light, compassion, grace, shielding, and protective energy. Please go within, be the shoulder, be the lighthouse, seed your truths, light that path forward, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Thank you for watching, supporting, and being a part of this channel. Bye for now.